So first up is Pharaoh's Hot Springs, a scientific and investigative expedition to Hammam Faraun, Pharaoh's bath in Egypt, to answer the question, in the face of conflicting pressures for tourism, clean energy infrastructure, historical preservation, and the protection of unique ecological environments, what should Hammam Faraun and other hot springs in the Sinai region become? This expedition is led by Dr. Roxanne or Roxy Fournier, joined by fellow expeditioners Sadek Hefni Shorbagi and Matthew Bisner Poirier. Thank you so much to the three of you for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining our presentation today for our planned expedition titled Hammam Faraun into the Pharaoh's Hot Springs. So I am Roxy. I'm the expedition leader. I'm currently a researcher at the University of British Columbia in Canada. And today I'm joined by my expedition team, who are fellow Canadians as well. Matthew, who's currently based in Bordeaux, France, and Sadek, who is also Egyptian and is living in Cairo. So although the three of us are living on 3 different continents, we actually met while doing our graduate studies at the University of Toronto. And so we're all trained scientists. So let's start with a brief intro of our project.
Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend our presentation. And I hope by the end of it, you will be as excited about our project as we are in pursuing this exceptional journey. Now, the first and most obvious question is, what is a hammam? So while the term hammam has gained global fame as a type of spa, the hammam originated in the Middle East and North African regions in the early medieval period. And it was inherited from the Roman baths, and one can even trace its origins as far back as pharaonic times. Now, the term hammam means bath in Egyptian Arabic, and it is a public space used by men, women, and children separately. And generally, people use the bath for cleansing, bathing, a scrub, a massage, but not only that, because the hammam in those times fulfilled a socioeconomic role. It was a place where people need to discuss business deals, exchange news and gossip, and this is how information circulated in those days. Think of it like a modern day cafe or how information spreads on social media. But nowadays, the hammam is just a place to relax and benefit from its soothing waters, and you typically rarely hear anyone speaking in a hammam nowadays. But on the other hand, what we have is a natural hammam, which is when geological conditions align so perfectly that nature bestows upon us a natural spa. Now, the source of water originates from the underground, and typically they are found in remote locations. And the picture shown on this slide is the Sea Oasis in Egypt's western desert, which is right on the border with Libya. It is a very popular tourist destination for both locals and foreigners. And as you can see, there's a lot of greenery in the area, and a really good amount of effort has been done to integrate eco-lodges with the oasis, and makes for a very pleasant stay when visitors go. And so, as you can see on the map on the left, the Sea Oasis is located at the northwesternmost edge of Egypt, whereas our region of interest is on the complete opposite side, on the northeastern side, where the Sinai Peninsula is located. But I'd like to start by saying that this journey is fundamentally rooted in the geological formation that encompasses the greater region of Hammam Faraun. Because about 50 million years ago, as you see on the picture on the right, the diagram, the Arabian plate began shearing away from the African plate in what's known as the Red Sea Rift, causing the Sinai Peninsula to essentially be torn away from the African mainland, with the Red Sea and the Gulf of Suez filling the gap between. You can think of this geological event as the metaphorical curtain being pulled apart, essentially unveiling these many important and beautiful landmarks that dot the region. And one of those we will see is St. Catherine, which is a place at the foot of Mount Sinai, where one of the oldest monasteries, or probably the oldest monastery, exists. And you can see how incredibly beautiful the geological landscape in this area looks like. And the next slide shows an overlooking of the Gulf of Suez in a westerly direction. And on the right of is a picture of the national park that's called Ras Muhammad, which is right on the Red Sea and known to have some of the most beautiful coral reefs for people who are avid divers to go and see. And so you might be wondering at this point, well, where is exactly Hammam Faraun on the map, and how do we even get there? Okay, So this map here shows you exactly where it is in the grand scheme of things. It's located, it's tucked away at the interface between the Sinai Peninsula and the Gulf of Suez. And it is at this very interface that lies a playground of intracontinental rifts that has carved the many beautiful features of this very special place. From caves that reach sauna-like temperatures to the hottest and mineral-rich thermal springs known to exist in Egypt. And so how do you get to this site? So the first thing I have to do is I must preface that in Egypt, signage isn't our area of expertise. And this rather obscure sign only written in Arabic is the one clue that may lead you to Hammam Faraun. And I say because at this point that one must travel off a beaten path to the site itself. And a site which possesses a potential of incredible proportion. So you can see it's kind of, you have to sort of figure out your way once you've gotten off the main highway, and then you have to do some turns, and it's a very interesting path to take to lead you to this place. So I will hand it over to Mathieu to guide you into this very sacred place.
Thank you, Sadek. So the first and most obvious feature is this giant of a gebel, which means mountain in Arabic. So the cave and thermal spring system rests upon the shoulder of a giant, Gebel Hammam Faraun, which impressively peaks at 500 meters, standing out as the most pronounced topographies of the Gulf of Suez coastal plain. So cargo ships that pass by in the Gulf of Suez definitely will not miss this feature. So the site itself rests upon a landmass called the Hammam Faraun fault block that is flanked by two fault lines, which resulted in peculiar geological features, including Gebel Hammam Faraun itself, along with thermal springs, caves, limestone deposits, otherwise called travertines, and volcanic bodies. These very interesting features we want to document with photographic evidence. And so at this point, we have reached our destination of caves and springs, carved out from intracontinental rifts along the coastline at the shore cliff of Gebel Hammam Faraun. What's particularly interesting about this system of spring is that their flow rate seems to follow the tides, and the temperature of the water is much higher than most other geothermal springs in the area, so between 60 and 70 degrees Celsius. This very high temperature means that the water is not just exposed to geothermal gradients, but may also be heated by volcanic magma deep below the ground. The tectonic forces which created this Gulf of Suez rift still appear active, as observed from hot springs on the seabed, and further evidenced by the continued widening of the Gulf of Suez. It is evidently from this rift, the Gulf of Suez rift, that Hammam Faraun was born. And it is one of 4 thermal springs that line the Western Sinai Peninsula, or eastern shore of the Gulf of Suez. So above ground, the features we are most interested in are the caves, which formed after parts of the limestone rock face collapsed due to the geothermal systems below. And in light of this information, what does Hammam Faraun actually look like from the inside? Well, in fact, very few cave interior images exist, but this will change hopefully after our expedition. Fortunately, we have spoken to an Egyptian geologist, Mr. Ahmed Shawi, who in recent years has been to the site and has taken photographs of the interior. On the left is an image of one of the caves that dot the shoreline of this region. But on the right is Hammam Faraun itself. And so who comes to Hammam Faraun and why? Well, historically, mainly local tourists visited the site in the hope of the healing properties of balneotherapy, which is bathing in warm, mineral-rich water to soothe certain ailments. Foreign tourists were very rare due to the site not being well known outside of Egypt. Of note, there is evidence that Bedouins, or desert nomads, had visited the site from time immemorial, but in modern times practice pisciculture near the site's shoreline. The Bedouins, along with the endemic wildlife, surround the Hammam Faraun area. Unfortunately, an accident at the site in 2020 caused its indefinite closure, and now the site is reserved to local research teams, such as geologists and botanists, often backed by Egyptian academia with strict permits obtained from the appropriate ministries.
So I hope we've convinced you that this area and this region of Sinai is absolutely spectacular, but its future is still fairly uncertain. So we have a unique opportunity right now, actually a rare window, when we might be able to contribute to the future and influencing the future of this natural site. And why now? So Matthew alluded to this, that the site is closed for now, but it can't be closed forever. So geothermal energy prospectors and tourism industry are starting to ask a lot of questions. And just to give you a bit of context here, just to the west of Hammam Faraun, there is what appears to be an abandoned development project, probably intended to be a resort. There's also nothing else surrounding Hammam Faraun currently, except for that desert road that Sadek mentioned earlier. Some other nearby resorts, for example, Ras Sudur, just north of Hammam Faraun, are quite developed and is a destination for kite surfing and other water sports. And then in terms of geothermal energy, Hammam Faraun is definitely one of the highlighted areas, just simply because it has really high water temperatures. It could potentially be a site for a power plant. But us as scientists, we're really interested in the sustainability and the preservation of this natural site. And so we came up with our own questions. What should Hammam Faraun and other hot springs in the Sinai region become in the face of these pressures from the geothermal energy industries and the tourism industry? And what's at stake if Hammam Faraun's resources become exploited for these reasons? So what are we going to do about this? Well, we thought as scientists, the best way to approach this problem is to gather some really important data that just does not currently exist. So our first objective is therefore to determine if the area around Hammam Faraun is unique. So for example, in this picture, when you have seawater mixing with hot spring water, you usually get quite a unique ecosystem that can arise from that. And so if we can show this, this might provide some incentive to further protect or preserve that area and prevent its disruption due to development. And so we'll be going to this site with our partners and contacts in Egypt. So we have contacts at Cairo University, Department of Geology and Department of Conservation, who will help us out, and especially for bringing in some portable equipment to do our data collection. So in terms of experiments, we can break these down into two subcategories. We have those that are relating to the caves and those that are relating to the hot springs. So we'll be collecting thermal data. We're also interested in chemical analysis of both the air and the water inside the cave, looking at oxygen levels, mineral content, and even radioactivity, because in fact, radioactive isotopes are generally found in many hot springs around the world. And importantly, we're also going to be mapping the interior of the cave using photogrammetry. So this method allows us to render 3D spaces using 2D images. And all of this will be really, really valuable for determining the potential of Hammam Faraun as an ecotourism site. And then as for the springs, we'll be sampling water and analyzing samples collected from the shoreline and underwater. So we will be doing some shore dives, collecting samples and analyzing them on site. So actually I have done a previous work in here actually nearby on Vancouver Island, studying the water samples from the Pacific Ocean. We've also done some surveying and IDing of species. So this is a chitin, a giant Pacific chitin. And then what we would do is we would analyze them on a small research vessel's tiny little laboratory, usually has some basic equipment like microscopes. So this is what we're envisioning for our expedition. We're also going to be mapping the volcanic bodies, as these could also be really valuable for future ecotourism. The second objective is to understand the historical significance of this site. So for example, its therapeutic uses and medicinal uses, and then trying to understand why maybe past projects who tried to develop this site failed. So we thought we can potentially learn from these past failures and hopefully not make those mistakes again in the future. But it's been really, really difficult to find resources about this site, about historical pieces of the site, especially in English. But one particular passage that I really love and would love to share with you all is this one from an author who wrote, "The Pharaoh's spirit is said to haunt the spot and boils eternally in the waters. His malevolent influence spreads to the sea, endangering passing ships." So there's a lot of folklore around the site, and we would love to find out more about this and share it with you all. So we're going to be digging into museums, tourist sites, talking to experts, and also local Bedouin communities. It's a really important aspect of our objective to raise awareness about the site and increase enthusiasm about it. So how are we going to tell this story? And importantly, whose story is it really? So to answer the how, we're taking a very holistic approach. As you can tell, we're incorporating geology, marine ecology, anthropology, history, medicine, all these things to show our audience the past, the present, and the future of this site. But it isn't necessarily our story. This really is the story of the people of Sinai. It's the story of all the people of Egypt. And we're engaging with as many local collaborators as possible to help us tell this story. And in fact, we've already been quite successful in that. And we found a few partners in Egypt that's giving us a great head start on expedition planning. In terms of output, we will be creating a photo essay exclusively for Hidden Compass with a variety of visual formats. So we will incorporate in underwater photography, time lapses, night shots, stills of the area, photogrammetry, and even microscope images. We understand that humans are visual creatures, and we hope to capture the imaginations of as many people as possible by having such a diverse format in our photo essay. And we really hope that in the end, it's going to generate some more questions, important questions that need to be answered about Hammam Faraun's future.
All right, so I'm sure you're thinking, well, we're going to Egypt, so what are the logistics involved, okay? And if there is one feature that connects the ancient Egyptians with that of the modern Egyptians, it is the obsession with overbearing bureaucracy that often requires one to remain patient and good-humored, no matter how frustrating the process may be. And I deal with this on a day-to-day basis, but despite this, there have been a lot of improvements when you compare how it was 10 to 15 years ago with technology and the efficiency of things. So that's great to know. And to proceed with the research, we're going to require quite a few different permits, some from the Ministry of Environment, some from the Ministry of Antiquities. We'll have to log every piece of equipment that we want to use, the visas, and other sources that we need to make sure we establish a good rapport with is to essentially, one, get a security clearance from the Egyptian Armed Forces, because we're entering a politically sensitive region, which is namely Sinai. And additionally, we would have to require some permits by the Egyptian Coast Guard so that we can do our dives near the shoreline of the site that surrounds Hammam Faraun. So a lot of things to do, but we've been getting some good headway with this. The contacts that we've established so far, which are amazing contacts, and they're really, really helpful and have been hugely beneficial. The first of which was Dr. Antoine Hirsch, who is the director at the Canadian Institute in Egypt, who you can see in the top panel in a Zoom call that we had a couple of weeks ago. He is very enthusiastic about our project, and he gave us a lot of insight into things regarding permits and equipment and all the kinds of really important bits of information we should be very aware of, and has also given us some connections to other individuals. But separately, we also reached out to Mr. Ahmed Shawqi, who is a geologist. He's at the geology department at Cairo University, and he's the author of some of the most comprehensive geological studies of the region of Hammam Faraun. So you can see him in the bottom panel there. We had a Zoom call with him quite recently, and he was very helpful and very gracious with his time. He told us a lot about the site and a lot about the logistics, and he's very excited to be a part of the collaboration on this project. And he definitely knows this place better than anyone, and especially that he's been doing research even since the closure of the site. But he's a massive resource that we're going to really benefit from. Another person that we contacted is Medhat Abdurrahman, who's a conservation specialist at the Egyptian Museum. There are, of course, archaeological institutes in Egypt that have been here for a very long time, and I have some close ties with one of them, and we really hope to get information from them and maybe also connections to other archaeological institutes and see what we can do in terms of equipment use and other kinds of guidance. The last is the Marine and Plant Biology Department at University of Cairo, American University of Cairo and Alexandria University, who we will eventually be in close contact with and see what we can do, what kind of help we can get from them. So the last thing that I'm going to leave you with is that, as you recall, I had mentioned how signage wasn't our area of expertise. Well, here's another example of it. But after a very insightful talk with Mr. Shawqi, he shared with us this obscure sign that says, if I translate from Arabic to English, it says, "Caution, Hammam Faraun antiquity site is under protection of law number 117. And so it turns out, as he told us, which we weren't aware of, that there is a nearby archaeological site, not exactly right where the cave and thermal springs are, but close by, with what seems to be, as he described, the drawings or scriptures that is still under study. And he said it's still, is a site that is accessible to interested people or just interested parties. So, so I'll leave you with that little bit of tidbit that we would definitely incorporate in our project. And I'll open the floor, or we'll open the floor to questions. So thank you very much for listening.
Great. Thank you so much. We want to make sure the audience, you guys, we want to answer your questions. So feel free to drop them in the question and answer function. If you look down at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A between the raised hands and the apps buttons. So use that, send us your questions. Sabine and I will read them. But Sabine, do you want to get us started while we're waiting for questions from the audience?
Well, yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to say is that I used to do some marine biology myself, and that's probably the biggest chitin I've ever seen. So Roxy, thank you for pointing that out to us. I want to talk about your project from a storytelling perspective. So you mentioned this photo essay, but there are also other opportunities to publish updates from the expedition that allies will get to see. So what might allies expect to see from your team before, during, and after the expedition?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We are fully going to be posting some things on Instagram. So we all have Instagram accounts. I think we may even consider creating an Instagram account for this project, which would be great. But definitely to discuss. I think I would love to post as much as I can, little snippets here and there of some elements of the data collection, behind the scenes elements as well. We do have to be slightly cautious with the kind of military presence. So not taking too many pictures of things that we're not supposed to. But yeah, we're happy to share as much as we can on social media. I think that would be a great way to engage with people throughout our project.
That all sounds wonderful. I actually want to ask about something you just mentioned, which is, being careful about what you're taking pictures of and those types of things. I want to ask about the risk potentially, and what are some of the risks on an expedition like this, and how are you all managing them, and what are your plans for those types of things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've gotten some great feedback from people who have recently done expeditions in Egypt and also in Sinai. So Sadek mentioned Ahmed, and then also Dr. Antoine Hirsch, and they gave us really great feedback about specific permits that may be required. But in addition to that, even if you might have the right permits, you might still encounter, some issues. But essentially, we're going to be, because we have so many contacts on the ground there in Egypt, it's going to help us out a lot. And Egypt, the way that researchers get to do research in such sites like these ones is generally they do assign some military presence for assistance. So we might even be able to secure some kind of military presence that can, manage maybe some of the checkpoints and things like that. But definitely, I think a huge help will be the Canadian Institute in Egypt, who are dedicated to helping research groups like us get the necessary permits and make sure that we're aware of what we can bring into the country, what we can't bring into the country, and things like this. So I feel like we are quite prepared for the risks, but definitely there's a lot more work to be done. Our contacts have been fantastic to help us, though.
Yeah, I'd like to echo also that our contacts, and specifically Ahmed Shawqi, considering that he's been to this region, and of course, depending on which region you are in Egypt, it always helps to know locals, but even the officials that are around these areas, and this is an incredibly important asset to have, because whenever you go to a specific place, there's always locals, and you want to be on their good side. You want to know what you can do and what you can't do from their perspective as well. And I think that really goes without saying, but sometimes people don't realize that, but we are very well aware. And we have Ahmed Shawi, and I'm sure there will be other people to join who will be incredibly valuable in, you know, guiding us, at least letting us know when it comes to going to such sites and showing what you want to show, or pictures, etc. You know, that it goes through their filter as well, and not just ours.
It's really important. So the audience had a follow-up question on this, which is, so we've talked a little bit about sort of the logistical risks, the political risks, those types of things, but what if just about the physical risks related to this type of work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we will be doing field work, which always, you know, you have to think about your safety. And we're also going to be doing some diving. Of course, you know, we're going to make sure that we have ground support in case something happens physically, that we have the ability to be extracted and can get to first aid or medical aid nearby. In terms of the diving, for sure, for all of our previous expeditions, diving trips, we've always made sure to have the proper insurance for diving. It's a really, really important thing to keep in mind, because things can go wrong underwater, and to treat things like decompression illness can be many, many thousands of dollars. So making sure that we have all the proper insurance in place and all the proper methods to get to these medical treatment centers will be keeping that in mind and planning that well in advance.
There's another question from the audience. I love this one because you sort of mentioned you may or may not know the answer to it, but what is or could be inside the caves?
Yeah, that is a very, very good question, and something that we're hoping to answer with more detail as we actually get to the site. So it seems like from previous notes from other authors that it can go as far as 50 meters inside. So it's large, and this is why we really want to do the 3D mapping, just to figure out exactly what's in its depths. And I mentioned checking oxygen levels because, you know, there's vents from these hot springs coming into here that can displace the oxygen. So really, we don't really know what's inside in terms of the geological features, how much water is actually in there. These are all questions we're gonna try to answer. Yeah.
There's one last audience question, and before we move on to the next presentation, and that is, the ultimate goal of your expedition is about determining the future of the site. But is there more specific information? Is there more specific information out there, or that you're hoping to determine?
Yeah, we will, as part of Objective 2, we're going to try and better understand what the current situation is there. So you may or may not know, but COP27 is actually gathering in near that region. So discussions about environmental impacts of energy use and things like this. So Egypt is aware of its issues revolving around pollution and all of this. So they're trying really hard to integrate more clean energy. And so that's a huge factor, but it's not really well understood, at least from our research online, where they're at with trying to develop geothermal energy there. So for sure, that will be an important element of our Objective 2 on the geothermal energy side. And then on the tourism side too, just speaking to people in the region, maybe people who have tried to develop the area in the past would be really, really insightful. And all that's going to go hopefully into our piece. But yeah, there's actually, as far as we can tell, not too much information that's available. But yeah, that's what we're hoping to change.
Great.
Those were some great questions from the audience. Thank you so much. And I'll remind everyone that, you know, if you're signed into your ally accounts, you can go and review the full proposal for this team. for both teams, actually. And there you can find more information on the timeline, on the budget, and on sources and so forth. So we highly encourage you to go and check those out. Thank you so much to Pharaoh's Hot Springs team for being the first to pitch your expedition idea.